Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for my weekend reading report. Yes, it's time for my weekend reading report, where I talk about all the exciting stuff that I read during the previous week. It's a thrilling episode today, as always, because I did read some stuff. I read some stuff last week, Roger. So what did I read last week? Well, let's talk about it. Let me grab my list. This is my list for the 500 book challenge. The challenge where I must read 500 books that I own before I'll buy any new ones. This challenge just keeps going on and on. But here we are, and right now we're talking about book 156 on the challenge. And that was this book. This is a Voyage to Arcturus. You can't tell just by looking at it, but that's what this book is. It has a title page in here somewhere. Here it is. It's A Voyage to Arcturus by David Lindsay. A Voyage to Arcturus, which I talked a little bit about last week because I was almost finished with this book when I was doing my weekend report last week. This book is very, very strange. Written in 1920. I read this both for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, because you can get this book for free on Project Gutenberg. I read this for that and for Rocket Summer, because the first week of Rocket Summer, the prompt for the first week of Rocket Summer, the fantastic reading event devoted to reading classic science fiction, the first week is books written up, science fiction books written up until 1939. Which covers a lot of ground. So the beginning of science fiction, whenever you think that might be, all the way up through 1939. And this was written in 1920. And this book, man, it's strange. So Maskell, the hero of this story, he's sort of a hero. I mean, he's a murderer, but he's kind of our hero, I guess. He goes and travels to the planet, and I'm forgetting the name of the planet, but it orbits Arcturus. And it's a really weird planet with very strange people. And basically Maskell travels across this planet, occasionally growing different organs on his body. Like he has a tentacle that grows out of his chest, and then it becomes an arm, and then he grows a third eye, and then other weird things. That happens to him frequently. And he meets a bunch of truly bizarre aliens, some of whom he murders. And it's really weird. And the sheer imagination of this thing is really impressive. Lindsay really stretches his imagination as far as the kinds of characters that Maskell meets and just the bizarre setting. And it's just, there's so much weirdness in this book. However, doesn't have much of a plot. It's basically a book that's really Lindsay kind of expounding on philosophy. Unfortunately, I find philosophy to be tediously boring. So there's that. And it's basically just Maskell walking across this planet, traveling across this planet, meeting different people, occasionally killing them or leading them into destruction. And he does that over and over again and meets new people, travels around, meets more people. It's basically an odyssey, a very bizarre odyssey. And so as far as a plot, there isn't much here. Has a good ending, though. I did like the ending of the book. And I highly recommend it just for its sheer weirdness. And it has proven to be a pretty influential book in science fiction. It is really a fantasy. It has some of the trappings of science fiction. And so because of that, some people consider it science fiction. But it's really too weird to be science fiction. It really is a fantasy. So interesting book, and I highly recommend it. I will probably talk more about it at another time. I really have to wrap my head around this one because that book that book was strange. So then I moved on to book 157, which I enjoyed quite a bit more. I have read this before. Also, I also read this for the first week of Rocket Summer, and that is this book, The Land That Time Forgot by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and it was fantastic. Let's see if it says when it first was put into book form. 1924. This book was published in 1924. It actually was previously published in the magazines, as most of Edgar Rice Burroughs' stories were, as 3 different novellas that made up basically one story, The Land That Time Forgot. And in the 1960s, the paperback publisher, Ace Books, broke this novel apart into 3 different novels. And so you had The Land That Time Forgot, The People That Time Forgot, and Out of Time's Abyss, which are the 3 novelettes that make up, or novellas that make up this novel. And it was published in 3 parts. So I could have counted this for the 500 book challenge as 3 different books, because it has been published that way. But it was originally published as one book, and basically it tells one story, which is about how the survivors of an attack from a German U-boat during World War I, they managed to take over this German U-boat, German submarine, from the Germans, and they pilot this submarine, and they find this lost island. So this is a Lost World story. And of course, since it's a Lost World story, it has to have dinosaurs on it. And there are a ton of dinosaurs on this book. Or in this book, I should say. There's a ton of dinosaurs in this book, as well as other creatures, as well as these winged humanoids, which are really, really creepy. There's all kinds of stuff going on in this book by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It was fantastic. Now, there's this really weird thing that happens in this book. This weird thing that goes on this lost island of Caspak, this lost island of Caspak. And I don't want to spoil it because it's just so weird. It has to do with evolution, which Edgar Rice Burroughs doesn't seem to have understood all that well. But it's interesting. It's really interesting, and I don't want to spoil that aspect of the novel for you because it's one thing that elevates this above your typical Lost World story. And so this truly is a science fiction novel, an early science fiction novel. I think it was great for the first week of Rocket Summer. I had a good time with this book. I highly recommend this. This is the Bison Press edition of this novel, which has all 3 parts. All 3 novellas in it. And great. I have, of course, read this before, but it's been a while. So this was fun to read. So yeah, Edgar Rice Burroughs, The Land That Time Forgot. Great book. I highly recommend it. So I read that for Rocket Summer, and then I moved on to something completely different. I moved on to the book I'm reading now, and I'll take out my magic tablet and flash up the cover there. This is the Vampire Chronicles collection from Anne Rice. I'm reading The Vampire Lestat right now. The Vampire Lestat, the 2nd book in the Vampire Chronicles. What did I do there? And I recently read Interview with a Vampire, loved it, and it's been years and years since I've read The Vampire Lestat. I think it might be since the 80s since I've read this book. And I remember liking The Vampire Lestat a lot more than Interview with a Vampire. I really liked Interview with a Vampire, and I think Interview with a Vampire might actually be the better book. I enjoy this more, though. I'm almost finished with this book. I've got, well, it's hard to say how many pages I have left in it because it's an ebook, but I don't have, I should be done within the next couple days. I don't have too much longer with this book, and I've really enjoyed it. Lestat, who was basically the villain of the first book, is a much more interesting character than Louis, who is the vampire hero of the first book. He's just such an interesting character. And so Anne Rice brought him back for this book, where he, of course, the first book was told from Louis' perspective. And Lestat, of course, says that everything Louis wrote in that book was a lie. He just was lying in that book. And Lestat decides to tell his own story, where he tells the story of how he became a vampire and current events for the vampire Lestat, which was back in the 80s, when he becomes a rock star. He becomes a vampire rock star. Of course he does. But this book also tells the stories of other vampires. We get to learn the backstory of Armand. We get to learn the backstory of Marius. And so we have other vampire characters in this book. And it's just really interesting. So it breaks new grounds and takes the Vampire Chronicles in a kind of a new direction. Again, I think Interview with a Vampire as a book worked better as a book. This kind of veers all over the place, but I enjoy it. And like I said, Lestat is so much more interesting than Louis, and he's so much more fun that I'm just having a good time reading The Vampire Lestat. And then I will eventually move on to Queen of the Damned, which is the next book in the series. I remember that being not as good as The Vampire Lestat, but we'll see. It's been a long time since I've read any of these, so we'll see. I'm having a good time right now reading The Vampire Lestat, so I'm going to finish up this week, and then I'll read another book for, I keep doing that, Rocket Summer. And then I'll read another book for Rocket Summer. So that's what I'm reading right now. But I did finish another book, and that would be book 158, which was The Final Gauntlet. This is Thor. I am, of course, reading every issue of Thor from the first run of Thor, which began in the early 1960s and ended in the mid-1990s. And I am in the 90s now. And The Final Gauntlet, this epic collection, collects a bunch of issues from 1992 and 1993, and it does have the final issues from the run from DeFalco and Ron Frenz. Yeah, Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz. Their final issues are in this epic collection. And I have to say that it ended well. It was really cool, had a really good ending. And, you know, there's the mighty Thor flying away. But Eric Masterson there, also, this is where he takes on the identity of Thunderstrike. Thunderstrike, a character that I think lasted a couple years in his own book before finally being canceled. And I think he died. He died, didn't he? Yeah, he did. Poor fella. Spoiler alert. But there's what he looks like as Thunderstrike. Didn't last long, poor guy. And then this book moves on to a new team took over Thor at this time. Jim Starlin and Ron Mars started to write Thor. And the artwork is by Bruce Zick. Bruce Zick. First of all, we get this terrible cover. This cover is just, I don't even know what to say about this cover. This cover is insanely bad. And you can't unsee it once you've seen it. So sorry, everybody, for showing you this terrible Thor cover. But then the artwork inside is by Bruce Zick. Bruce Zick, who can't really draw people all that well, at least at the time that he was writing this. Bruce Zick is actually an interesting artist, and he's actually a really good artist. He's done the backgrounds for a lot of Disney movies. So if you've seen Hercules, if you've seen a bunch of other Disney movies, the backgrounds in those films, those animated movies, were done by Bruce Zick. So he's actually really talented, and he's done a lot of artwork, a lot of really weird alien-looking landscapes and things like that. So he's a talented artist, but drawing human beings, not his strength. However, he is really good with weird backgrounds. And as you can see from this image of Asgard, yeah, he comes up with some pretty wild background art. So he's got that going for him. And let's see, there's another scene I want to get to where he if I could find it, where he does a scene from Hades, the underworld, which was really, really good. I will find, here it is, Hades, the underworld. So as you can see, we have this really wild background. We've got Pluto there, and his throne is just crazy. Look at that. Look at Pluto's throne. But then you look at Ares there, and he just looks like an action figure. You know, so, you know, he has some strengths and he has some weaknesses, Zick. And I can understand why he moved on from comic books, for the most part, to do other things. But he's actually the best thing about these issues, because what these issues do is Thor has just come back, okay? He's been gone and he's been replaced for a long time. Finally, he's made it back. And they decide to make him a crazy maniac. Thor goes insane. And so we have several issues. I don't know how long it's going to go on, but we have several issues where Thor has come back and he's an insane maniac. He's basically a villain. He's become a villain, unfortunately. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not thrilled about reading about Thor as a villain. This great hero Thor is now an insane maniac. I mean, when you're reading about Thor and he's fighting the Super Skrull, you shouldn't be rooting for the Super Skrull. But in this comic book, Super Skrull is actually kind of the good guy. Now, the thing is, if Thor's an insane villain, how is he worthy to lift his hammer? His hammer should just like fall right out of his hand, and he shouldn't be able to lift it if he suddenly become an insane maniac. Because how can he be worthy? So, you know, it was the 90s. It was 1993. And after DeFalco and friends left, maybe they just didn't really know what to do. There was a period when Marvel suddenly just didn't know what to do with some of their best characters and came out with some of the crappiest comic books about those characters ever. And Thor seems to be heading in that direction, unfortunately. We'll see. But I finished this. I finished this one. And I've moved on now. I moved on to Blood and Thunder, which is the 21st Epic Collection, which has stories from 93 to 94. So I'm reaching the end of the first run of Thor. I'm reaching the end. And I don't know, man. I'll tell you how it goes. So there's that. And I think that's everything that I have to report. I think that's everything I have to report today. So next week, more science fiction to talk about for Rocket Summer. And I will catch you then.